Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Monday, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a crime writer, a journalist, and a member of Sisters in Crime Australia, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce Sara Foster, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Sara, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
The last time Sisters in Crime saw you was when you spoke at the Melbourne Athenaeum in 2019. Sadly, because of the pandemic, live events are just not possible. So having you on Murder Monday is such a bonus. You were born in England, and that's reflected in the settings of most of your novels, an impressive 7 psychological thrillers. Your writing also draws on your work as a book editor, first at HarperCollins in the UK, and then as a freelance editor. You've edited and proofread more than 100 books, including novels by Paulina Simons and Leanne Moriarty. Not to mention the autobiography of your teen idol, Jason Donovan. And as well as being a keen snorkeler and scuba diver, you're also doing your PhD at Curtin University in dystopian fiction. Before we start with the questions, can you please give us the elevator pitch for your latest amazing novel, The Hush?
Thank you, Karina. It's fantastic to be back with Sisters in Crime, even if we can't be together in person. So, the elevator pitch is it's set in the near future in the UK. There's been an increasing number of unexplained stillbirths across the country, and there's a number of pregnant teenage girls gone missing. So in response, the government's clamped down on women's freedoms and increased powers of surveillance across the entire country. However, most importantly, this book is about a formidable group of female characters who are determined to find out what's going on, get to the truth, and look after one another.
Yeah, it's a great cast. I'm
Thank
loving
you.
it so far. I'm about 2/3 the way through, and I just can't
Awesome.
put it down. Okay, let's get to our questions.
All right.
How do you write about violence?
Oh, that's a really good question. I really struggle to write about violence, actually. I have to leave those sections to the last moment. I always take time to get to them. I never want to get to them. So I build up to it. I think it through in my head, and I try to, in my kind of psychological suspense, it's not so much about the violence, it's about what's going on behind the scenes, kind of the psychological makeup of the characters, what's caused that to happen. So I tend to find that less is more, really. I don't need to go into graphic details to establish a point. I think that the more I draw back and just try and get to the essence of the emotional resonance of that situation is what draws out almost the horror of the violence without actually needing to go into such graphic detail. So I think that's generally how I approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I love this question. I am in the middle. So I do this thing which I call backstitching. Well, actually, I've stolen that off Meg McKinley, who calls it backstitching. I like to write until I run out of steam. Normally, when I do that, something's gone wrong, but it means that I've got my ideas down to begin with. So I haven't just held back by trying to get everything in the right order. And I find that quite frustrating. So I get my ideas down. When I run out of steam, then I go back and I kind of build a framework around what I've done. So I'll look in each chapter, I'll find out how often I've mentioned characters, situations, whether the plot is moving forward in all those chapters. And I'll actually build a little table for myself of how that's happening and look at it all. And often then I can see what I've done wrong. So I can see where the gaps are and what I need to fill in. So I do that. Normally then when I look at the table and I'm ready to go again, I just set off again. I don't clean that table up. So it's never really a polished version of itself. And I've never had a finished plan. because at some stage I leave the plan behind because then I can see my way to the end and then I just write. So I'm a bit of a mix.
Wow.
What do you do, Karina?
Oh,
what do you do?
I'm a bit of a mix too. I think I know the end and the beginning, and then I just write from the beginning to the end one way through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's an awful mess. And then I have to go back and filter all the mistakes. And,
yeah. You see, I'm quite lucky because by doing it like that, it comes out quite clean at the end, because I've kind of gone back, forth. So it can be frustrating in the middle, but it kind of pays dividends when you get to the end. Normally I have a fairly clean version. Yeah. I say fairly, still with all the editing to go.
How much of you is in one of your characters?
I think I am in all of my characters somehow, somewhere, but how much of me really varies. You know, I do draw on my own experiences, my own observations, all sorts of things to embellish the characters, but I've never written a character that I've felt is just about me. I mean, definitely in The Hush, I think I share similarities with the approach of Emma, to the way that she likes to be this kind of quiet rebel, sort of sneaking in there, challenging where she can, but also accepting the way that society functions at times and wanting to do things differently, but yeah, also wanting to not cause too much of a furor. So yeah, I see elements like that, but I've never actually sat down and thought, okay, you know, this is based on me. So always just little bits. Yeah,
great. What's the scariest thing in your latest novel?
Just the entire concept is it's terrifying. Yeah, I was quite daunted by when I had the idea and I realized what the world background was about, particularly with the unexplained stillbirths. I was very daunted about writing about that. I wasn't sure I could do it. It took quite a bit of thinking about, but I was also convinced that I wanted to go into intimate experiences of women and the way that women are subjected to experiences through different kinds of authority figures from different kinds of authority. And I really knew that that was a really good way to find my way in and explore those situations. So the entire world I built around that, and the amount of surveillance that's in this world, and the people that, you know, are sort of threatening what they're actually trying to do in this world when you find out more about the story, is terrifying. And yeah, just the redeeming factor of that is the fact that these women in this book, I love them, obviously, and they're so awesome, and the way they fight back made it all feel bearable.
yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. The whole concept is scary in this novel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the women characters are amazing, though. Very, very heartening. Yeah,
that was where my love, that was where my passion, you know, lay, in building those women up to fight back against that system.
Yeah. How many drafts do you do before handing it in?
It varies depending on which book we're talking about. So this book's had a lot of drafts, actually, more than I would normally do. I think I knew that this felt like a very special book to me. It's something that I've obviously done as part of my PhD, and I really wanted to get it right. So I was prepared to go back in and back in. Sometimes they've just been through a very straightforward, I've gone to the end of that process we just talked about. I've got the completed book. It's gone in, it's had a structural edit, it's had a copy edit, and then it's been published. And in actual fact, it seems like I do more drafts the more I go along, but perhaps that's because I'm honing what I'm doing and trying to, you know, tell deeper, bigger stories. And so you naturally need to dig in a bit more when you do that. Yeah, great. Do women write different crime stories to men? Oh, that's a very good question. Yes, I think so. But, you know, that's a very broad answer. I think there are women who love all sorts of different kinds of crime, you know, so some of them are very orientated to much more of the plot and the action elements of crime. Yeah, what I would say is much more of a pacey read. And then other women in particular, I think, focus on the more internal aspects of crime, the more emotional resonances of crime, the long-term impacts of crime. I'm trying to think, because I definitely read more women writers than I do men. So it's not an answer I can provide fully, but from what I've seen, and certainly the kind of fiction I enjoy, I would say the external story is where I see much more of the male writing lie, and the internal story is brought a lot more by female writers.
Yeah, no, great. What's your top writing tip and what's your top self-editing tip?
My top writing tip, oh, it's so boring, isn't it, when you say read, because everyone says that. I would say, well, I'd extend that, and I would say find a book you love and that you wish you'd written, and just analyze it. Yeah, just see how they did it, because it's fascinating looking at the fine detail of what the author chose, which language, which kind of language the authors chose, and how they structured their chapters and things like that. And if you really explore that, I still do that now. I often, if I get stuck with my writing, I go back and I find another book that I think did something really well, and I'll go, how did they do that? And I'll just look through that. And it's quite comforting, really, because those guides are right there on your bookshelf. You don't have to go in the library. You don't have to go far to find them. You don't have to pay for an expensive course if you're unable to. So yeah, that's what I would say. Find those touchstone books and really analyze them. Self-editing tip, I would probably go back to building a framework, just the way I was talking about before, because I think that the interesting thing about editing is you have to go into the fine detail. You're literally choosing tenses and words, and there's such great detail and which words to slice out of a sentence. But there's a bigger component of editing as well, where you have to step right back and be able to analyze the story as a whole and the structure of the story. That's so important. And I'm not sure, when you are an emerging writer, whether you are always aware of that dance of going in and out, back and forth. Whereas if you build a structure around your book, particularly if you are a pantser, and again, when you're a plotter, there's always elements that you can add into that. You can then analyze the book at that macro level before you go into the fine detail again. Yeah, I think that would be one of my big tips.
Great. No, perfect. What started you on a life of crime?
Well, I think my love for Nikki French was one of the big reasons, because I used to love Nikki French. I mean, I still do. I just haven't read as much. They write too fast for me. I haven't caught up yet. And I was fascinated with what they brought to crime writing. I found that their stories were much more psychological, because it's a husband and wife team, for anyone who doesn't know, writing those books. Yeah, much more psychologically driven. And the structure of their stories is really interesting to me as well. And I realized that I don't think that I am always a traditional crime writer, as in I do like to take the psychological suspense element and push that. So I'm much more looking at family relationships. So obviously, this one's dystopian. I sort of veer in and out of the crime elements of the story. But so do they. And certainly the one book that I read that really resonated with me was Beneath the Skin. And that has 3 different voices in it. It's told from 3 different points of view. And what happens after the first part just blew me away. And so I won't tell you, because I'll, spoil the story. But I looked at that book and thought, that's really exciting, different way of writing, but still in the crime genre, which I do love, analysing how ordinary people get caught up in criminal or extraordinary events. And I saw my way in then, saw how I could approach that. Terrific.
Do you start with the plot or the character or something else?
Depends, I think. So in other books, I've definitely started with a character. So I know Shallow Breath was a woman looking out to sea, and I could tell that she was distressed, and I was trying to figure out why. And then my very first book was based on a newspaper article I read that was about a very tiny event in Perth. And I thought, what on earth would have happened to those people after that event? And then this recent one really was my interest in how mothers and daughters are represented together in dystopian fiction, and building something that I could write around that kind of idea. So it started as quite an abstract idea in a way, but then I quickly found my mother and daughter, who are Emma and Lainey, and began developing them. So if the plot comes first, the characters aren't far behind, because yeah, that's where it all lies.
Yeah, great. Why is crime so appealing as a genre?
Oh, well, I personally think it allows us to examine a whole wealth of events in safety that are terrifying, scary, sometimes exhilarating as well, exciting if you're watching, you know, bad guys, people catching bad guys. Yeah, I think it allows us to look at those elements of life in safety, not feel guilty about all the different emotions that come up when you're reading that kind of book, but be able to put it down at the end and go, okay, that's over there, you know, and now I can. But obviously it's such an absorbing genre as well, because it does teach you so much about psychology, human nature, yeah, the lengths people go, the extremes of lives that people live. So it's fascinating as well, but I also think there is that element of, you know, safe rubbernecking almost, and being able to look at situations without having to confront the reality of them.
Yeah. What's the hardest part about writing a novel?
Perseverance, I think. Well, and nowadays I'd say the amount of hours you spend at the computer or poring over a piece of paper, because when you've written quite a few, you realize what a toll that's actually taking on you physically, and it becomes quite a different challenge as you get older, I think, to make sure that you're staying healthy in the writing life, because writing is very sedentary, and so you start to think more about, you know, how I need to go for a walk while I'm thinking about these characters. I can't just sit in my chair and think about them. So yeah, definitely that. But the other one is the amount of time it takes to dig in. I mean, you know, I've had stories where I just got halfway, or I've got to a certain round of editing, and I've just felt like, oh my God, I can't go back in. I literally am so tired and my head is so full that I can't, you know, and every time you have to go, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to give it up, or are you going to recommit to that story? And every time I've had to go, right, recommit, and recommitting means re-examining everything about the book. So yeah, that perseverance is a real challenge.
Yeah, I love that perseverance. I think that's a great tip. Does your main character ever surprise you?
Yes, they do actually. So there's one of my main characters in The Hush she's called Geraldine, and she's this older feminist. She's kind of a real second wave feminist, and she's very kind of loud and proud about how she thinks. She surprised me, because when I got to writing her, and she doesn't come in till partway through the story, she just gave me this 20 to 30 page manifesto, just is on and on and on. And I was like, okay, like, I'm going with this. And then I had to pare it right back, you know, to the essence of what she would say, and also how long the reader would suffer to hear her say it. Yeah, other times there's a character in Beneath the Shadows, he's called Ben, and he just began this hobby in the middle of one of my writing sessions. It's like, oh, you know, oh, you do that, do you? And so yes, now and again, organically, they seem to reveal something about themselves to me, or take over, and I feel like the passenger. And I don't know whether that's my subconscious building up the character until they're ready to go and then taking over. It's a bit more woo-woo, you know, the characters are really living in me, or I don't know what it is, but it's quite a nice experience when that happens, because I really feel like in some way they are alive, and they've come to life, because it's not just me, you know, they are telling me. I'm not just discovering them and after them and pursuing them. They're literally coming to me and saying, this is who I am. Yeah, that's a lovely moment.
I love that. How do you approach representing diverse communities in your writing?
Yes, I really try to be very aware of where I'm setting things and the kind of things I'm talking about, and think about how I'm representing diversity in writing. And I think I'm still on an education in that respect. After the last few years in particular, it's brought such a lot to light. I'm trying to read more and more diverse fiction for myself, listen to more advice and talks about how to incorporate characters for myself, I think I've made my peace with it, in the sense of, because I do find it very hard and quite challenging to think about that, because I don't want to offend, I don't want to get it wrong. So I think I've tried to make my peace with it by going, I'm going to include diversity wherever I can, and be aware of that, because it can be very easy to get like that kind of white centric focus on what you're doing. Yeah. So to be aware that that is a real possibility, but also to be really respectful of how I do it. So I can't ever see myself writing a main character who was Black, or, you know, kind of, unless the story really fitted that. But I feel like there are other people that do that better than me. Yeah. So I don't know why, but I will always have a cast of characters who come from all sorts of diverse backgrounds. And so I try and think, should I be the person telling the story, basically? And if I don't think I should, well, then however good the idea it is, I think, you know, I'm not the person to do that anymore. And that is an education that I think other communities have brought to us lately, and that we should really be listening to.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah. And our last question for today. How would you get away with murder?
Probably not very well. I don't know, but I have a friend who has helped me a lot, who is in the police force here, and she works in the coronials department, and I refer to her quite a bit when I need research advice, and she says to me that she knows the perfect way to commit a crime. Ooh. But she won't tell me what. She knows the perfect way, literally, to get away with murder, what you would do, but she won't tell me what it is. So if I really wanted to get away with murder, I would go to and make her tell me.
And we'd know who to follow up with then too.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So I wouldn't even get away with it, you know, I've gone to for advice.
Sara, thanks for being with us today on Murder Monday for Sisters in Crime Australia.
You're very welcome, it's a pleasure.